Hello, I'm Tony Perkins, President of the Family Research Council here in Washington, D.C., and I want to welcome you to our special webcast event, Free to Believe, Religious Liberty in the Land of the Free. In the last few years, we have seen an increase in government-imposed restrictions on the ability of Christians and other religious people to fully live out their faith in all aspects of their lives. Many of these restrictions are falling on those who are most public with their lives, business people, those running Christian organizations, and those in places of high visibility within our own government, including our nation's military. The beliefs which are making them targets for government hostility and even prosecution in some cases are the same beliefs held by millions of Americans across this country. Just because many that are listening today have not personally been harassed or penalized for living out their faith does not mean that the freedoms that you and I enjoy will remain forever. This government-sponsored hostility will only expand until we stand together and demand our government respect the Constitution's guarantee of our fundamental first freedom of religion. That is the only way any of us will ultimately remain free. There is a significant need for such protections at the federal level of our government. Religious organizations and individuals remain vulnerable to their religious liberty being restricted at this level of government, whether due to their views on the sanctity of human life, the sacredness of marriage, moral guidelines on human sexuality, or a host of other issues. It's not right that nuns trying to serve the poor are forced to compromise their beliefs regarding human life in order to continue their work. It's not right that a Christian organization working hard to assist victims of human trafficking should be forced out of doing that work because they don't want to adopt someone else's view on the issue of human sexuality. As was noted several weeks ago during the oral arguments in the Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer case, religious groups should not be treated worse off than non-religious groups. But that's what the federal government does to such groups when it doesn't allow them to fully exercise their religious freedom. Our beliefs, quite frankly, are not something we can simply give up. They're not something that we can negotiate away. They're fixed. They are ingrained in who we are as individuals and, quite frankly, as a nation. And that goes for our military, too, where servicemen and women increasingly face administrative punishment for nothing other than voicing their long-held Christian beliefs. Just as nonprofit organizations should not have to trade away their beliefs just to continue to serve the poor, our servicemen and women who are literally ready to lay down their lives for their friends, their rights to exercise their freedoms should be protected as well. The freedom to live out our faith in all areas of society is what has historically made America great. Yet it has suffered recently, and we must restore it, which will be, I believe, central to making America great again. For this reason, it is imperative that this administration issue a clearly worded executive order, unequivocally protecting religious liberty. We must call attention to these problems and the need for such protections. For these reasons, we have put together this program today. In it, you will hear from those who have been affected by this hostility from our own government. We will also hear from experts and attorneys who can help shed light on how we can fix these problems. We hope you will leave this webcast more informed and ready to take the necessary action steps that we'll be providing throughout this special broadcast today. Again, I want to thank you for joining us. And to begin, we are honored to be joined by the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Baltimore, William Lory. He is a busy man, but has been out front on this issue of religious freedom, and we're thankful that he's taking a few minutes to join us today by Skype. Archbishop Lory, thank you so much for being with us today.
Very glad to be here and very glad to take part in this program.
Well, Archbishop, in February of this year, you joined with the other USCCB chairman and other members in calling upon President Trump to fulfill his promise to protect religious liberty, and you encouraged him to sign an executive order. Can you give us some examples of how, as you have seen it firsthand, how religious freedom in this country, the exercise of that freedom, has been inhibited in recent years?
In general, I would say that the biggest challenges that we have faced do not pertain to worship as such. In fact, there has been in many statements and descriptions of religious freedom a tendency to describe or to reduce it simply to freedom to worship. So
Right.
It's in effect saying, well, if you want to get together in a church and pray on a Sunday morning, that's fine with us. But once you step outside that church, you have to just get along and go along, and we're going to see to it that you do. It's mainly our ministries of service. It's our educational ministries. It is our charitable ministries. It is our service to migrants and refugees. Those kinds of services have come under increasing coercion, particularly with regard to things like our health insurance plans, where we are in those ministries being forced to in some way ensure for contraception, in some places even abortion, and where we are being driven out of adoption agency, the work of placing children with families through adoption because of our support for traditional marriage, and many other examples as well. One of of course, the prime examples is the Little Sisters of the Poor, a group of sisters who care for the elderly and the poor, who find themselves having to include contraception, abortion-inducing drugs, and non-pro-life reproductive counseling for the daughters of employees in their health care plan. It's pretty incongruous that they would have to do that, but there has been a lot of that kind of coercion in recent years.
Archbishop, I want to go back to something you just said about it's not the freedom of worship. I mean, we have the freedom to go into our church, and no one's saying that we don't have the right to worship in our church, but it's what you pointed out, that it's when we take that faith that we're taught on Sundays in the sermons that we hear or the Mass that we participate in, and we go out and we live according to that. That's where the conflict has begun, when we're actually living our faith out in the marketplace, or as you've said, in the charitable world of the nonprofits.
Sure. Religion is not merely something that we do externally for an hour or two per week, perhaps to make us feel better. Religion is a way of life. It's once you've been exposed to the Word of God, once the love of God has touched you in your depths and transformed you, and we're all somewhere on that scale, God willing, it gives rise to a whole way of life and of love. And as Pope Benedict said, that he said, someone who has hope lives differently. And so it's this different way of life. It's something that causes us to go about our daily work and our family life differently, in a way that is in accord with God's plan. It is also something we bring into the workplace. And the institutions, the ministries that people of faith give rise to is going to reflect their deepest convictions. And religious freedom means you have a right to shape your whole life according to your faith.
Right.
And that you have a right to bring it into the workplace. And it certainly means that religious institutions have a right to do their ministries in accord with the faith that inspired them in the first place.
And historically, that's the way it has been in this country. Back in 2011, Cardinal Dolan appointed you to chair a newly formed ad hoc committee on religious liberty. Let me just ask you this question. We've just got about a minute left, but what do you think is at the core of this threat to religious freedom in America today?
Oh, I think there's a couple things. Number one, There is certainly an increasing militant secularism that has infected government. Secondly, I do think that our political speech has strayed very far from our founding principles. And indeed, these are hardly even being taught or understood anymore. But the third thing relates to ourselves. And that is to say, if we want to protect religious freedom, we have to love God more. We have to practice our own faith avidly. It really comes down to evangelization, first and foremost, in my view.
I agree with you 100%. Archbishop William Lory, thank you so much for being with us today. It's good to see you again, my friend.
Pleasure. Thank you, and thanks for doing this.
All right. Look, folks, this is an issue, and I want to emphasize something that the Archbishop just said. The best way to keep our freedom is to use our freedom. And that's what we have to do as Christians, evangelization, sharing our faith with others. And that's why we work so aggressively here at the Family Research Council to protect religious freedom so that you can live out your faith in a real and a tangible way. Well, one of the areas that's of great concern to us here at the Family Research Council that has been really at the center of this battle over religious freedom is in our nation's military. As a veteran of the Marine Corps, I understand the key role that chaplains play in the lives of Marines. They face situations that most Americans will never face. And my next guest, many of you will be familiar with because tens of thousands of you signed a petition to support him when his religious freedom came under fire while serving in our military. Lieutenant Commander Wes Motter, a 19-year veteran who had served with the Navy SEALs after being a Marine, was stripped of his duties for providing Bible-based advice that was voluntarily sought in a counseling session. Chaplain Motter was ambushed by his own assistant who secretly gathered information on Motter's beliefs and private counseling sessions to file a formal complaint. Now, representatives with the Equal Opportunity Office served Chaplain Motter with papers accusing him of discrimination. And then he turned to our good friend First Liberty Institute for Legal Assistance to try to get his job back. And thankfully, in early September 2015, Chaplain Motter was exonerated by the Navy and continued to serve without a blemish on his record until he retired last year. Gentlemen, welcome. Chaplain Motter, welcome to the program. Mike Berry, thank you so much for being here today. I know you represented Wes Motter in this case. I just want to start with you, Chaplain Motter, to talk about, what was it like when, serving as a chaplain, doing what chaplains do, all of a sudden you were served with these accusations that were made against you and you were relieved of your position?
I was shocked. I felt betrayed by my country and by the Navy. And I had to stop and pause and think to myself, why would this happen to me? And I'm providing good biblical worldview-based counseling in private sessions with my assistant, and voluntarily. And I think the issue was that the government was not invited into my conscience. And as an ordained minister, I'm going to give that biblical worldview. It doesn't mean that I'm not caring for people, not able to function in a diverse, pluralistic environment, but certainly, God sees value in every person. And I think the greatest gift as a chaplain I can give is being truthful and honest with people.
Mike Berry, unfortunately, Wes's case is not unusual. It's not an anomaly. We're seeing more and more of this across all branches of our military, are we not?
Unfortunately, that's exactly right. We've seen really nothing but an increase. The hostility to religious freedom in our military has showed no signs of slowing down. What picked up momentum over the past 8 years in the previous administration has really carried on, and to take away religious freedom from those who swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, to me, is really the greatest form of offense that I can imagine.
Well, to a large degree, men and women who serve in our nation's military are not capable of defending their own freedom. I mean, really, they have no recourse, and so they're limited on what they can say and do.
That's exactly right, Tony. I think the chaplain's role and function is not only caring and providing and facilitating for other people's faith, but it's also, we're there to protect people's First Amendment rights. The chaplain's there to ensure religious freedom and freedom of religion, and so the guns and the crosshairs were turned on me. I happened to be at the right place at the right time at one of the Navy's leading premier schools, the Navy Nuclear Power Training Command, where a lot of young people are coming in the military. And I think a lot of the young people in policy and procedures looked at it as I was maybe not following procedure, when in fact I was following the biblical mandate. So now we have strategic instructions that are on the street that are counterintuitive to Scripture. So there's conflict there.
There is recourse. I mean, there is a way that these freedoms for men and women in our nation's military can be and should be protected.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what Chaplain Motter discussed was the inability for many service members to really come to their own defense. And oftentimes the military JAGs are not familiar with issues dealing with the First Amendment or religious freedom. And First Liberty Institute is obviously very honored and privileged to be able to step in and support him and secure victory. But beyond, First Liberty Institute and FRC and other allies, really, we need to have a culture change in our military. There needs to be a very specific and direct mandate sent to the military. Obviously in this country we still have civilian control of the military, and when the President is Commander-in-Chief and Congress, who holds the purse strings, tells the military, you need to start following the law and not violating the Constitution for our service members, the military will obey that, and that's what we need to see.
Well, in your case, you had good legal representation, and of course we work very closely with First Liberty in that we put out a call for people to stand with you, and I personally actually delivered the petitions to the Pentagon, to the Chief of Chaplains. And I forget how many it was, 150, 160,000 petitions that we had signed. But there are a lot of folks, a lot of chaplains and others who the visibility of their case doesn't rise to that level, and so they lose that freedom. They're punished, they're driven out, or they're driven underground.
That's true, Tony. And what I would say to that, well, first, I want to thank all the constituents that supported me in my case. And secondly, I would say that, the pulpits across America need to be preaching the full counsel of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And thirdly, when our chaplains come from our local churches and they come and take that oath of office to become commissioned officers, and when our men and women go downrange and over the horizon, that chaplain needs to be covered and protected legally, and the command chaplains, the chief of chaplains need to respect each chaplain's tradition, that we can pray according to our conscience and our faith as missionaries from our own church to serve our men and women. And I would encourage any chaplain who is sensing that discrimination from the government to reach out and talk. Don't be silent. That's your constitutional right. That's what the military men and women are depending on.
Right.
And sometimes we have to lay that cross down.
And as you brought attention to it and you got assistance, you were exonerated of all charges. You were able to complete your career and retire from the Navy. Now you're pastoring a church. It doesn't have to be this way, as we were talking a few moments ago. This administration can issue an executive order, and that's the whole reason for our webcast here today, is draw attention to the fact that this administration, the President, can say government-wide, including our military, that this type of behavior has to stop.
That's right. And yes, the behavior does have to stop. And that's one of the easiest ways because again, the military, the Pentagon, is beholden to the Commander-in-Chief and is beholden to Congress. And if the President, via executive order, or Congress via legislation, tells the Pentagon, you need to do this or you need to do that, as we've seen over and over, when the President or Congress tells the military to jump, the military will say how high. And the problem that many people don't realize is the root of this issue is that embedded within the DNA of the military right now, in terms of not the military culture, but the military regulations and rules and policies, there is a lot of policy that is actually not favorable to religious liberty. Many would be surprised to find out that the average civilian out there probably has more religious freedom rights than does the average person serving in uniform. that can be changed with the stroke of a pen or the signing of a piece of legislation.
Mike, give our viewers some examples of other cases that pertain to the military. Of course, that's your area of focus. What are some of the other cases that you're working on or that you're aware of?
Well, right now we've got a case, it's actually a petition for certiorari pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. We're hopeful that the Supreme Court will take this case, and it's the case of a U.S. Marine who was actually convicted at a court-martial, which is a criminal proceeding in the military, because she did not follow an order to remove a Bible verse. She was actually ordered to throw it in the trash, but she didn't remove a Bible verse that she had taped to her computer. So really at stake there is whether or not the military can order somebody to do something that violates their conscience and their faith, and if you don't, you can be charged with essentially a crime. And
the context of that case, just so our viewers know, is that other workstations had other types of sayings and items posted on it. So it wasn't like nothing was allowed.
That's right. In fact, a commander would have to say nobody's allowed to have anything on their desk at all other than official government business. And of course, many commanders don't want to have that policy because they themselves would have to follow it too. And so that's one of the cases that's pending before the Supreme Court. We also represent the retired airman, Oscar Rodriguez, who was forcibly grabbed and dragged out of a retirement ceremony because he was invited there to give a flag-folding speech, and his flag-folding speech mentions the word God 6 times. And when I say mentions the word God, things like God bless America, God bless our troops, God bless the flag. I mean, things that are highly offensive, right? I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but.
Yeah, and to be clear, that was not on a United Airlines flight. That was at a retirement ceremony.
No, that was at a United States Air Force base, though, that men in the uniform of the U.S. Air Force, these are men who raised their right hand, swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, and are now violating the Constitution by grabbing a United States citizen because he was going to mention the word God and dragging him and removing him.
I mean, it's frankly, it's almost unbelievable where our country has gone, in particular our nation's military. Chaplain Motter, Pastor Motter, Dr. Motter, thank you for being here today, but thank you for standing up. Because of you being willing to stand up and First Liberty being there ably to represent you, I do think this could be a turning point as Americans understand just what is at stake with our first freedom, especially for those who protect our first freedom. So gentlemen,
Amen.
Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tony.
Mike, as always, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And folks, you can take action. I want to ask you to sign this petition to the President. You can sign it by going to FRC.org. That's FRC.org/freedomEO. FRC.org/freedomEO. You can see it there on the screen. Sign that petition. We will deliver those to the White House, but I'm going to ask you to sign it within the next 24 hours because we're going to be taking these up to the White House tomorrow. So please go to the website frc.org/freedomEO and sign that petition. Well, it's not just our nation's military. We see the attack on religious freedom all across America, including our college campuses. Joining us now is a familiar voice to those who listen to my radio program, Washington Watch. Dr. Everett Piper is a frequent guest host when I'm not behind the microphone. However, he has a day job, and his day job is serving as president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, an impressive Christian university that has found itself at the center of a religious liberty battle. Also joining us is Greg Baylor, who is with Alliance Defending Freedom, and he represents Oklahoma Wesleyan University and other Christian universities in this fight against the federal government's mandate on health care. Gentlemen, welcome to the broadcast today.
Pleased to join you.
I'm going to start with you, Dr. Piper. Give our viewers a quick summary of how Oklahoma Wesleyan came to be in the center of this major battle with the federal government.
I think we're in the center of the storm because we're Christian, and we're conservative, and we're proud of it. Oklahoma Wesleyan is a Christian institution, a Christian university that stands for the primacy of Jesus Christ, the priority of Scripture, the pursuit of truth, and the practice of wisdom. Our motto is impacting culture for the Lordship of Jesus Christ. We're bold and unapologetic about the gospel and about the inerrancy of the Word. And we're pro-life. By definition, you don't get hired at Oklahoma Wesleyan University unless you are pro-life. So whether you're on the staff, the faculty, or whether you're the president or professor, you must subscribe to the idea that God defines life and you don't. And as the result of that, the federal government is crossing swords with us and telling us that we have to provide abortifacient drugs in our health care. They're hijacking our health care and mandating that we provide abortifacient drugs to a bunch of pro-life women that work for us that don't want the drug, won't use the drug, and are smart enough, frankly, they're smart enough, thank you, to know what kind of health care they want in their health care package.
Well, how would you, as an institution, maintain your position of only hiring pro-life individuals if you, as an institution, comply with the federal government and subscribe to a health care plan that is not pro-life?
I don't know how I could. I think that would lack integrity for us to claim to be pro-life, but then turn around and buy a product that compromises that value, and to dishonor the values of the women that work at Oklahoma Wesleyan University by suggesting that they're not smart enough to choose their drugs that they want in their health care. I really think that's one of the keys here, Tony, is we are pro-woman as well as pro-religious freedom. We believe that women should be given the dignity to choose what they want and don't want in their health care. And the irony is it's the conservative Christian, the biblical Christian university that's taking that stand for the dignity and the rights and the privacy of the woman by demanding that the government stay out of their business and let them choose their own health care products.
Greg Baylor, ADF, has been representing not only Oklahoma Wesleyan, but other institutions that are engaged in this. This case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And they, what happened?
Well, the Supreme Court did not issue any kind of final decision. They discerned that there was some sort of basis for common ground between the parties that were challenging the mandate and the government, so they asked us to go back to the lower courts and have a conversation. We did do that. We tried our best to negotiate with the government to reach some sort of conclusion that would respect the religious freedom of Dr. Piper's institution and all the others. And unfortunately, the Obama administration did not really offer anything that was acceptable to us. So then the election happened, and we had great hope that the Trump administration would make a change to this mandate so that institutions like Oklahoma Wesleyan would be protected, that they would be free to live out their faith, even in how they operate their health care plans. We continue to communicate with the administration, and we do look forward to action from them. We hope that that action either constitutes a settlement of the litigation or, even better, some sort of executive order that not only protects religious liberty in this context, but in all contexts.
Right. Let me ask you this, Dr. Piper, in terms of what was at stake here? I mean, other than obviously the principle of the issue, but this wasn't just an academic argument. They were going to put fines on you as an institution.
Fines that are very burdensome that actually could put us out of business if we had to pay all those fines. And as you know, we are co-litigants with the Little Sisters of the Poor. We stand arm in arm with these pro-life Catholic nuns who are celibate. And I say this with a smile on my face. They're celibate. They're not having sex. So why do they need any contraception, Tony, let alone abortion-inducing drugs? How arrogant of the federal government to take their religious freedom away and our religious freedom away and suggest that we don't understand our own convictions and our own faith well enough to make our decisions on what kind of health care.
We were talking with Archbishop Lory earlier, and he brought up the Little Sisters of the Poor case, and I mean it would be laughable that, as you just described, that the federal government forcing the Little Sisters to provide for contraception, an abortion-inducing contraception at that. But Greg, does this not speak to how acute this issue is, this attack on religious freedom in our country?
Yeah, there used to be a bipartisan respect and consensus about religious liberty. It's not all that long ago in the early 90s where you had tremendous bipartisan support for something like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And now that religious freedom is being used by conservative Christians to protect their ability to live out their values, we sort of see an abandonment of religious liberty principles on the other side of the aisle. And that's what sort of justifies a lot of these attacks. There's no respect for diversity. There's no tolerance. And this is really an unfortunate development. We do hope that the current president will do something to make the situation better.
How have your students responded to this? That their university has been in the middle of this litigation, and it got actually a lot of attention, as we just pointed out. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, sent back down. How have the students responded to this?
Quite well, actually, and I think it's because they know who we are. I mean, we're not vanilla ice cream. We're a very clear flavor. When a student enrolls at Oklahoma Wesleyan University, they know what we stand for. And it's those 4 pillars I described to you earlier. We believe that Jesus is the Son of God, the Bible is the Word of God, that truth is given by God, and that obedience, sanctification, holiness is demanded by God, which is really critical here because we're not segregationists, we're integrationists. We believe in integrating belief and behavior and not segregating the two. And that's what true Christianity is. It's that integrated life, that holistic life. You can't just worship in the 4 walls of the church and be boldly and unapologetically Christian. You take it to the streets.
Yeah, I think the silver lining here is that for your institution is that the students are actually seeing practical application
Absolutely.
of their faith.
Absolutely.
It's not a theoretical discussion you're having in a classroom that, you may find your faith under attack at some point in time in your life. No, you're actually seeing it. And I want to commend you, and of course ADF as well, for being at the side of so many institutions, that you are modeling for these Christians how we are to stand and contend for the faith in the 21st century.
Well, we are, and we take that 4th pillar of our mission statement very seriously. You practice wisdom, you practice your faith, you engage culture, you impact culture with the lordship of Jesus Christ, which means that you've got freedom of religion, not just freedom of worship.
Right. Very quickly, we only have about 30 seconds left, but I want to, it's not contained just to the HHS mandate. There are other issues with the federal government's breathing down your neck as well.
Very quickly, the Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights sends us a Dear Colleague letter mandating that we provide transgender accommodations on our campus. They tell us that we have to deny the biological fact of the female and pretend that she's a fantasy and a fabrication, that she doesn't really exist. And they do this under the auspices of Title IX, a law that demands that women get equal access to the athletic field. Well, how can I give a woman equal access to anything if you tell me she doesn't exist?
And that, fortunately, has been rescinded, but there's a bigger issue that's got to be addressed, either, as you pointed out, by executive order or ultimately by legislation dealing with this issue. Dr. Piper, thanks for being with us. Greg, thank you. I'm going to ask you to stand by there, Greg. We've got another one of your clients who's going to be with us here in just a moment. But Dr. Piper, thank you for
so
your
much.
leadership and for standing up.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And folks, I want to encourage you to, again, take action. You are a part of this process, and you need to speak to your members of Congress, but also really would like you to sign the petition that we have at the website so that you can be a part of speaking to this administration. Go to frc.org/freedomeo, frc.org/freedomeo. All right, Don Vander Boone's family has been in the meatpacking and processing business for over a half a century, starting with his father after he returned from World War II. And they've been running their business according to their Christian faith. That was until just a couple of years ago when the federal government decided to butcher the family's First Amendment freedoms. Joining us now to share his story is Don Vander Boone, along with Greg standing by here as once again representing one of these Christians who have had their faith attacked. Don, thanks so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Tell our listeners what happened to you. You, as a meat processing facility, have the inspectors from the USDA there on site, and you had an incident that took place a couple of years ago.
Yes, so I operate a small beef processing facility, and we have 2 full-time USDA employees that are in our business all day, every day.
That's required by law.
That's required by law, and so everything that we do has to be passed and inspected by them in order for me to sell it. And so a couple of years ago, around the time of the same-sex marriage decision, I had seen quite a few articles in the newspaper, and we have a break room with a couple of tables where people sit and eat, and it got to be practice. People could bring in magazines, newspapers to share with others. And so around the time of this decision, I noticed a lot of the newspaper articles were very supportive of same-sex marriage, and a lot of articles that were kind of encouraging it. So when I saw an article on the internet that was giving more of a biblical idea of what marriage is and what family is and what I believe is God's plan for the family, I printed it out and put it on my break room table and didn't think too much of it. But then within a few hours, I was told there were people there to see me in my office. And so my office is upstairs, so I went up to my office, and there is the inspector in charge, one of the inspectors, and he had called his boss, and they were both standing in my office looking upset, and I wondered what I had done. I had this feeling like I'd been caught doing something, I didn't know what. And then they shut my doors, so I'm sitting there with them both standing looking at me, and I'm wondering... And,
this is in your business.
In my business. And so then they take this article that I had on the table, they had removed it, and they lay it on the table in my office and say, are you going to leave this article on your break room table? Because if you are, we're going to withdraw our inspectors immediately. We're not willing to work in a place that has an article like this on the table.
Which means your business would be shut down.
Yes, I can't operate at all without them.
Now, just to help me provide some context here for our viewers. You have a small business, about 45 employees.
Yes.
And privately owned. You are a Christian company, as we talked, as mentioned earlier. Your family has been in the meat processing business for over 50 years, almost 65 years or so. You've always operated as a Christian business.
Yes, my father and my uncle were very open with their faith, and their business unfortunately failed in 1998, and then my brother and I had an opportunity to start this in 2003, and I did the same thing that my father did and my uncle and what we had always done, be very open. I would pray with my employees in the beginning, especially when times were tough. We would pray together and I'd ask for God's help. I'd put religious materials on the table, and we were open about it with them when we hired people. So it was a business that we always tried to run according to biblical principles.
Well, in your website actually says that the company seeks to glorify and honor God in all that we do. So it's not like you're hiding your faith.
No.
Did your employees complain about any of this?
My employees have never had any problem with that.
They knew what kind of company they were working for, probably glad to work in a company like that.
Yes, I never had any. Employees are always very happy, usually appreciative of what we do, and hopefully it makes us a better company to work for.
Greg Baylor, I got to ask you this. I mean, when you first heard of this case, what did you think?
Just a remarkable thing. There couldn't be a more clear-cut violation of the free speech clause. Don and his company do have a right to express their views about a lot of issues, including the issue of marriage and sexuality. And for the government to come in and say, we're not going to allow your business to operate. We're going to jeopardize your company. We're going to jeopardize the jobs of your people just because we find offensive a particular viewpoint on marriage really is remarkable. We communicated with the USDA, asked them to fix this situation. They've largely ignored it, but just recently they did say that they're going to take up the complaint that Don and his company filed, and that's an encouragement.
But that's been filed for some time now.
It was 2015 when this incident happened, and the complaint that Don filed was in 2015. We didn't hear any, as of February this year, we hadn't heard a thing except acknowledgement of receipt of the letter, nothing substantive at all. And that in itself is a problem. But again, they have recently responded saying they're going to at least consider the complaint that he filed.
But that's under a new administration.
Indeed.
But this whole issue could be resolved with, as we were talking earlier, with an executive order, could it not?
Yeah, and one of the big problems is that administrations, governments need to respect religious liberty. That needs to be not at the back of their mind, it needs to be at the front of their mind. And I think an executive order, among other things, including the details, aside from the details, can tell everyone who works for the federal government, think first about religious freedom and the impact that you're imposing on it.
Don, I have to ask you, how has this affected you and your family in this business as this thing has kind of just been out there, hanging out there over your heads for so long?
Well, the hardest thing is I still have to work with the same people all day, every day. And so
The
I'll
inspectors?
Yes, and so I will still see them occasionally come through my break room and look through the materials on the table, look it over. And so when I get things in the mail or something I think I'd like to share, I sit there and have to think and wonder whether this would be the thing that will get me in trouble, whether it's going to be the thing they decide they don't want to work in my business and cause me trouble with it. So to this day, I'm still dealing with it.
This is incredible. His own business, his own building, own work table, his own break table, and if he puts information, it's as if you've got the government coming in, thumbing through his mail to see what he's reading and sharing with his employees and threatening to essentially shut down his business.
You know, I don't mean to exaggerate, but this sounds something like something out of an Orwell novel or the
does.
Soviet Union, the government actually rifling through your mail, looking to see what's on your break table. That's not the America that I grew up in.
This is what's at stake across the spectrum in America today. I mean, we've looked at college campuses, we've looked at the military, this is a private business. I mean, I'm almost flabbergasted to try to comprehend how far they could go if they can take materials off of someone's break table, privately owned business, simply because they disagree with it.
Well, and so many people, unfortunately, especially in the government, have embraced the idea that there isn't a freedom to speak, but there's a freedom to be free from offense. And anything that Don or anybody else says that's offensive, they have a right to be protected from that. I don't think a government inspector, of course, should be harassed or anything like that when they go into a workplace. But the idea that they can't work there simply because he's expressed his viewpoint, a viewpoint that he shares with tens of millions of Americans, that seems too far.
But what they're
from
doing is they're dictating their viewpoint on him in his privately owned business. Don, we're almost out of time here, but I want to ask you this from a standpoint of kind of stepping back for a moment from the issue per se, and about how this has affected you and your family spiritually as I'm sure you never expected to be in the center of this. How has this impacted you?
Yeah, I never expected to have to deal with this. I'd done a lot of reading about others that have dealt with it, so all of a sudden it was me, not somebody else. And so, yeah, it's really made me go back and think about what this country was founded on, and that our forefathers fought for this freedom to be able to express themselves and to be able to exercise their religion. And suddenly I'm in the battle too, and having to fight for the same thing they did.
Well, thank you for being willing to stand up, Don, and I know that you've found a great ally in the Alliance Defending Freedom and the great work that they do. But I go back to what I talked to Chaplain Motter about. Unless there are those that are willing to stand up and make themselves even a bigger target in some ways, but to stand up and defend that first freedom, that is, you made a point to describe that others have sacrificed to achieve for us. We will lose it if we won't stand up and defend it. So Don, thank you for being willing to do that.
God's grace.
Greg, thank you so much as well for being with us and all the work that ADF does on behalf of religious freedom in this country. Folks, I want to encourage you to do your part, to go to the website and sign our petition. You can sign it at frc.org. That's frc.org/freedomeo. And again, I'm going to ask you to do that right now. Go to that site, sign it, frc.org/freedomeo, and that will be delivered to the White House. Also, we have some resources available for you. Religious Liberty, an introduction to our freedom to believe. This is a great resource. You can go to the website and order it, or you can download a PDF copy. Again, that is frc.org/religious liberty. As we've discussed, this is an issue that's not only attracting attention outside of Congress among business and religious leaders, but it's also attracting a lot of attention in Congress here on Capitol Hill. Joining me now, Congressman Jody Hice, that represents the 10th Congressional District of Georgia. And prior to joining Congress, you were a Southern Baptist pastor. So this is an issue that's near and dear to your heart.
Absolutely, Tony. We've been in this battle for, goodness, well over 10 years, probably closer to 15 at this point. And we've been watching the continual demise of religious liberties in our country. And there's the appetite now and the movement to take a stand and turn this around. And I'm grateful that we have a president who's willing to take a stand with us.
Well, we've worked with you on the Johnson Amendment, which is just one portion of religious liberty that pertains to religious organizations, churches, and more broadly, nonprofits, being able to speak to the political realm, both from a standpoint of candidates and issues. This much broader. This is about being able to operate, whether you're a nonprofit or whether you are a for-profit entity, according to the principles of your faith. I mean, how critical is that from your perspective?
Well, yeah, you hit it on the head. One of the areas that we've been dealing with is the free speech rights in churches. But the reality is, it's the teacher in a local school. It's the florist. It's the baker. It's the fireman. It's in every aspect of our society right now. When people are taking a stand for their faith or being outspoken about their faith, particularly in the areas of life or marriage, we're watching those freedoms be taken away. And so we are talking now of the need, the necessity to be able to broaden our understanding of religious liberties, that it's not isolated just to the four walls of a church building, but it is something the First Amendment protects everyone in every walk of life.
And we've talked about this, that it's not just conservative, it's liberal,
Absolutely.
it's every viewpoint, because quite frankly there are differing views when it comes to religious teachings. And we have defended here at the Family Research Council those that have political views that are different than ours, because we believe that first freedom, the freedom of religion, is fundamental, and it's right there next to speech.
Absolutely, whether a person has a faith or not, the right to live according to the dictates of your conscience, whatever that may be, and to proclaim those beliefs in the public square without fear of penalty.
From your colleagues, among your colleagues, now we know there was a letter recently sent to the President calling upon him to issue an executive order, the whole reason for this webcast here today. And 51 members of the House signed that. I think about 18 members of the Senate signed onto a letter. What are you hearing among your colleagues? How important of an issue is this to them?
You know, for some who are aware of it, it's an issue of great awareness. Kind of the surprising reality to me is the lack of knowledge and awareness that a lot of people have that this is even an issue. And, you know, until you live and see freedoms being taken away, you're not always aware that they're being taken away from other people. And so this is something I'm grateful we have a hearing coming up on this issue, and it's all intended to raise awareness of just how severe the problem is. I think many of my colleagues understand that we do have an issue because they see it on college campuses, they see it in different places, but the depth of and the severity of the problem, I think, still needs some educating.
How important is it that members of Congress hear from their constituents on this?
It's huge. It's enormously important because the constituents, many of them are the ones that are suffering the consequences of the shift towards the First Amendment. And I just encourage everyone to reach out to their representatives on this matter.
What are you hearing from your constituents?
Oh, well, you know, unfortunately, I'm kind of have been leading the charge on this, but that's one of the things that I hear over and over and over is gratitude from multiple people, like you say, from faith and not faith, people that just appreciate the fact that someone's standing for the First Amendment, regardless of what the beliefs of the individual may be. The First Amendment is a core principle that we cherish in this country, and we've got to defend it.
Congressman Jody Hice, thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you for your leadership on the Johnson Amendment in particular, but on religious freedom as a whole.
Thank you, Tony. Great to be with you.
All right. Folks, you heard it. You need to contact your member of Congress. Let them know where you stand on the issue, in particular on this issue of the executive order. And here's the information here on the screen. As we talked about earlier in the program, it's key that we exercise our religious freedom in order that we preserve that freedom. So I want to encourage you to exercise that freedom, to live out your faith in a real and a genuine way, and not shrink back, not be intimidated, but also take action. We have an opportunity. It's a narrow window of opportunity, but it's an opportunity nonetheless. So it's important. Respond and contact sign this petition so that we can take this to the White House. But I want to talk for just a moment with the Vice President of Government Affairs, David Christensen, about some of the legislative initiatives to protect religious freedom. Obviously, the immediate effort to pass this executive order, that takes care of it, at least from a federal government standpoint right away. But there's also legislative fixes that are required long term.
No, there is, and there's a number of bills that pro-religious.
By the way, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have on there, whether it's the First Amendment Defense Act to protect people of faith based on their views of marriage, whether it's Conscience Protection Act to protect against government discrimination based on abortion. There's also bills, Child Welfare Provider Protection Act, a bill where we've seen charities who helped adoption and help foster kids.
Catholic charities.
Catholic charities, a great example, have literally been kicked out of several states because of their religious beliefs.
But they've been unwilling to compromise, obviously, their faith.
Absolutely.
And so they've just had to shut down, which in the end, who suffers in that case? It's the children and the others.
Exactly. So, you know, religious liberty, EO, is absolutely essential right now to protect right now. But a future president could
Right.
change that,
I
and
think-
we need legislation.
Right. You need to understand the executive order is, as we said, an immediate fix, but it's temporary because the next president, hopefully not, but the next president could
Right.
undo that executive order and put us right back to where we are. As we've talked about here today, unprecedented attack on religious freedom. Now, I want to bring in an element we haven't really talked about, but it is one that's on the mind of many Christians as we see internationally the attack on Christians and other religious minorities. I mean, we're talking about outright persecution. Record numbers of Christians last year, 9,000 Christians have been confirmed to have been killed for their faith. That has grown exponentially over the last few years. You can't disconnect what's happening here domestically at the hands of our own government and what terrorists and tyrants are doing abroad.
It really undermines our diplomats and our foreign policy message to fight for human rights and not protect human rights here at home in the United States, including religious liberty. So people are getting beheaded, people are being persecuted in incredible ways. And so, you know, liberals, conservatives talk about these things, but it's lip service if we're not protecting religious liberty and faith here in the U.S.
So folks, I know churches often make reference to and pray for the persecuted church in the Middle East in particular. We're seeing places in China and North Korea where Christians are outright murdered and persecuted for their faith. And yes, we need to stand for them, advocate for them, pray for them, but here's where it starts in a very practical way. Our government must speak with one voice on religious freedom. The ability to live out your faith starts right here at home. This administration can solve this immediately by issuing this executive order on religious liberty. And so I want to encourage you to sign that petition again. That is frc.org/freedom.eo. That's frc.org/freedom.eo. Now, I spoke with Congressman Heiss a few moments ago about the letter that members of Congress have signed to the president. So it's not just religious organizations that are advocating for this. There's a clear understanding on Capitol Hill that this is needed.
Yeah, it's absolutely. 18 senators signed this letter, and 52, it turns out, 52 House members sent a letter to the president asking for a religious liberty EO. That's a pretty substantial number of members who are saying publicly, because the letters get leaked to the press, we urge you to protect religious liberty as a fundamental principle and something that we were elected to be here. We want to see that protected across the board. This is a huge response to the Obama administration and just agency after agency implementing regulations punishing people of faith. Millions of dollars wasted on lawsuits that should never have happened in the first place. So these members are to be praised, but obviously, ultimately, people watching this webcast have to continue to support them and continue to press and sign that petition to press for religious liberty protection.
And folks, again, I want to encourage you to sign that petition. I will say that I've had conversations with the Vice President, even the President, on this issue. I know they're very sympathetic and supportive, actually, of religious freedom. The President has stated repeatedly he supports the Johnson Amendment, the repeal of the Johnson Amendment, and is working I believe, moving forward this issue of religious freedom. So I'm very optimistic, but it helps if you are standing on behalf of religious freedom, encouraging the president to take these steps. And when he does take those steps, to stand with him and support him, because I can assure you, the liberal media will not. Well, it's David, I want to thank you for joining us, but I want to break away for just a moment to invite one more special guest to join us as we wrap up this special program today. It's been a busy day on Capitol Hill, and one of FRC's good friends is taking a quick break. They just had votes on the House floor, and he's joining us via Skype. And the reason I've invited this next member of Congress is because prior to joining Congress just recently, he was in the courts advocating for religious liberty long before he came to Washington, D.C. I've known Mike Johnson for over 20 years. We share the same home state of Louisiana, and I welcome him to the program. Mike, welcome to this special program.
Hi, Tony. It's great to be with you.
Well, we're just about to wrap our time up here talking about the need for an executive order on religious freedom, and we've had some of your former colleagues at Alliance Defending Freedom on. We've had those from First Liberty here, and so we've ran across the landscape, whether it was educational institutions, the military, private business. From your perspective, how big of an issue is religious freedom and the attack that it's under in America today?
Well, at the risk of repeating anything that's been said, and I apologize I didn't listen in because I was on the House floor just now, but it is a major problem. I was in the state legislature before I joined the Congress just this year, and we were seeing it on the state level as well as on the federal level, that increasingly you have government encroaching upon the most fundamental rights that we have, and that begins with the right of conscience, the right of religious freedom, our first freedom. I think it's critical that we strengthen religious liberty protections, and I'm glad that we have a president, I think, who's going to be willing to take that necessary step. It's a desperate measure for a desperate time that's come to us all.
You've been working on this issue for a number of years, and it's not really, static, the attack. I mean, it is growing.
It is indeed. We've cataloged, First Liberty Institute and others, and FRC over the years have begun to catalog and count the increasing attacks on religious freedom that we've seen. Sometimes the media tries to whitewash that, and it doesn't always make the evening news, but it's happening every day at a local level, at a state level, impacting individuals and small business owners and professionals in every single field. And if we don't get on top of it now, we're going to have a problem that we simply can't overcome. Our fundamental freedoms are being taken away from us, and that's why these steps are necessary now.
Now, I know you've represented a lot of different clients on this issue of religious freedom. In fact, I've written about some of them in my book, No Fear. I wrote about
Sure.
the cheerleaders in Texas that you represented in that case. Of the clients that you have had, how many of them never thought they would be at a point where their freedom, their religious freedom, was being attacked?
Most all of them. It always seems like a surreal, sort of theoretical thing that would never happen to us. It would never happen here, and yet it does. And you have these radical secularist organizations who are constantly out, really on a search and destroy mission for all things religious. And those who have a sincerely held religious belief and have the audacity to want to act upon it are squarely within their crosshairs of their targets. And it's an unfortunate thing. And they often pick on mom and pop organizations, high school cheerleaders. No one is immune to their attacks. And so that's why it's important for people who understand the necessity of our first freedom and understand how important this battle is, that we stand together and we speak up. And certainly when an opportunity presents itself, when we have an administration, a White House, who understands the necessity of these things, that they act with us, it's going to be a good thing for the country.
Mike Johnson, let me ask you one final question here before we wrap our time up. Some would say, well, these are people that are in business. Let's just focus on the business folks. We had Don Vander Boone, who owns a meatpacking company, small business owner, who was basically threatened by the USDA that they would shut down his business if he didn't remove literature from his break room that they found offensive to them. Some would say, well, if you're in business, maybe you don't have a religious freedom. Maybe you got to back off when you're in the marketplace. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say, for one, that the Supreme Court has addressed this in recent years, as you know, in 2014 in the Hobby Lobby case. And they said that you don't surrender your free speech, your religious freedom, your first freedom, just when you enter into a profession or when you enter into a career. You shouldn't have to choose between your job and your career and your most sincerely held religious beliefs. And that's a fundamental premise of who we are as Americans. I mean, Jefferson said it's inconsistent with the spirit of our laws and the Constitution to force tender consciences. That's the basic premise of who we are as Americans, because our right of conscience is important to us not only as countrymen, but as human beings, and we've got to protect it at all costs.
Well, Mike Johnson, thank you for what you have done to protect that first freedom, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Tony. Good to be with you.
All right, Congressman Mike Johnson. All right, folks, our time together has come to a close, but I want to thank you again for joining us here on this special broadcast on religious liberty, freedom to believe. And again, let me encourage you to go to the website, take full advantage of the resources we have there. Download the petition, order petitions. It's a great place to order them and take them to church, pass them out to your friends. Let people know about this first freedom and the attacks that are present. And, of course, sign the petition. You can do that, frc.org/freedom-EO, frc.org/freedom-EO. And as I told you earlier, when we had Chaplain Motter on, and we had over 150,000 or so petitions signed for him, we took those to the Pentagon. We will take these to the White House. And I believe they will be speaking a word of support to this administration, to a president who has said that he is supportive of religious freedom. And I believe that he will be taking the necessary steps to protect that first freedom. So again, sign that petition, and we'll add it to the others and take to the White House. But most of all, let me leave you with this. Use your freedom. Use your freedom to protect your freedom. Use your religious freedom to protect all of our freedoms. Do not shrink back. Do not grow silent in the face of opposition, but live out your faith in a real and authentic way, in such a manner that it touches the lives of others. On behalf of all of us here at the Family Research Council, thank you for joining us, and may God bless you.